Verified department records. Genuine field evidence. Unbiased justice. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
When Officer Sean Grady pulled over a faded 1998 Honda Accord on a quiet Thursday night, he was looking for an easy arrest. He assumed the driver in the grease-stained work jacket was just another civilian who couldn't afford a lawyer to fight a questionable stop. He had no idea the man behind the wheel was a 22-year police veteran and a commanding lieutenant. Before we break down how one illegal detention destroyed a patrolman's career and triggered a federal audit, let us know what city or country you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more real accountability. Officer Grady's actions that night were the result of a documented dangerous pattern. In his personnel file, there were 2 prior citizen complaints filed within the last 18 months. Both alleged aggressive tactics and unlawful detention during routine traffic stops. Both times, the department's internal review classified his actions as within policy. The department's early intervention system, a software framework designed to flag officers exhibiting dangerous behavioral patterns, failed to trigger an alert. He was assigned no remedial training. He faced no disciplinary action. The message was implicit but unmistakable. His tactics generated no consequences. At 2310 in the city's industrial district, Grady was cruising down a stretch of road lined with chain link fences and closed warehouses. He spotted the older Honda Accord. To a procedural officer, it was just a vehicle obeying the speed limit, but to Grady, it fit a familiar pattern from prior stops that had never been questioned. An old, beat-up car in this part of town, driven by a black man usually equated to a driver who would not have the resources to fight back in court. The driver he was profiling was 48-year-old David Cole. Cole was a lieutenant in the neighboring precinct's violent crimes division, but tonight he was strictly off duty. He was driving the old Honda by choice. It was a mechanical project he was restoring for his teenage daughter's upcoming 16th birthday. He had just picked the vehicle up from a friend's transmission shop. Wearing a grease-stained Carhartt work jacket, faded jeans, and a plain black beanie, Cole looked exactly like the demographic Grady frequently stopped. Grady accelerated, tailing the Honda closely. He ran the license plates through his mobile data terminal. The system returned a completely clean slate. Valid registration, valid insurance, no active warrants. Without articulating any specific traffic violation, he activated his overhead emergency lights. Inside the Honda, Lieutenant Cole looked at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting in his rearview mirror. He didn't curse or panic. As a veteran officer, he knew the statistical reality of these encounters better than anyone. He also knew exactly how to dismantle a bad stop from the inside out. With practiced mechanical precision, Cole activated his turn signal. Instead of pulling over on the dark, isolated shoulder, he drove another block and pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of a closed gas station, ensuring the entire interaction would be captured by the station's external security cameras. He shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. He rolled down all 4 windows to eliminate any shadows or perceived visual threats in the cabin. He turned on the interior dome light. Finally, he unclasped his black leather wallet from his back pocket, placed it flat on the center of the dashboard, and rested both of his hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. It was the perfect textbook execution of a traffic stop protocol. Cole had systematically removed every possible excuse for an officer to claim they felt threatened or needed to escalate the encounter. He sat in the glow of the dome light, watching in the side mirror, as Officer Grady stepped out of his cruiser, his hand already resting heavily on his holstered firearm. The initial approach of a traffic stop dictates the psychological and tactical baseline for the entire encounter. Officer Grady exited his patrol cruiser, leaving the heavy driver's side door ajar. The high-intensity halogen spotlight mounted to the cruiser's A-pillar was locked directly onto the Honda's rear-view mirror, washing the interior of the older vehicle in a blinding, sterile white light. Grady walked with a wide, deliberate stance. As he closed the 20-foot gap between the vehicles, his right hand unclasped the retention strap of his level 3 duty holster. He rested his palm heavily against the polymer grip of his 9mm service weapon. In his left hand, he carried a heavy tactical flashlight. He did not approach the driver's window directly. Instead, he positioned himself slightly behind the B-pillar of the Honda Accord, a standard tactical position that forces the driver to turn his head awkwardly over his left shoulder to establish eye contact. He raised the flashlight, directing the beam through the open window, sweeping it across the dashboard, the floorboards, and finally resting it on the driver's face. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Hand 'em over," Grady ordered. The volume of his voice was pitched loudly, cutting over the low, mechanical rumble of the cruiser's idling engine. He did not offer a standard greeting. He did not state his name or his precinct. Most importantly, he did not articulate the legal reason for the traffic stop. By omitting the probable cause or reasonable suspicion for the detention, the interaction immediately bypassed standard community policing protocols and entered an adversarial phase. Inside the illuminated cabin, Lieutenant David Cole remained entirely still. His posture was rigid but devoid of the erratic, nervous energy typical of high-stress encounters. Both of his hands were firmly anchored to the steering wheel at the 10-2 positions. His fingers were spread slightly, ensuring they were completely visible from the officer's vantage point outside the window. "Good evening, officer," Cole replied. His voice was steady, resonant, and carefully modulated. "Before I retrieve any documents, could you please articulate the reason for this stop? What specific traffic violation did I commit?" Grady's posture stiffened. He shifted his weight, the heavy nylon of his duty belt creaking slightly. The procedural, legally precise tone from the driver was not what he expected. It disrupted the anticipated script of a standard street-level stop. "I didn't ask for a conversation, buddy," Grady said, taking a half-step forward, closing the distance to the doorframe. "I gave you a lawful order. Give me your ID." "I am not refusing to identify myself," Cole stated. He did not turn his head toward the flashlight beam. He kept his eyes focused forward on the windshield. "My wallet is resting right there on the center of the dashboard. I placed it there before you approached so my hands would remain in plain sight." A wallet sitting in plain view on a dashboard removes a critical variable from a traffic stop. It eliminates the need for a driver to reach into concealed areas, such as pockets, glove compartments, or center consoles, where weapons are frequently hidden. "I don't care where you put it," Grady replied. His voice grew louder, the cadence of his words accelerating. "Reach over and hand it to me, now." The command created a procedural paradox. Grady was ordering a subject to make a sudden reach across a dark dashboard while simultaneously standing at the window with a hand resting on an unholstered firearm. "I prefer not to reach across the vehicle while your hand is resting on your weapon, officer," Cole said, his voice dropping to a flat, observational tone. "You are welcome to retrieve the wallet yourself, or I will slowly reach for it if you explicitly instruct me to do so for your body camera." The verbal acknowledgement of the body camera was a deliberate marker. It was a spoken timestamp, confirming for the digital audio record that the driver was aware he was being filmed and was requesting specific parameters for his compliance to ensure his own physical safety. Grady did not respond to the request. The dispatch radio on his shoulder cracked, a brief burst of static followed by a dispatcher's voice reading a license plate for a different unit across the city. Grady ignored it. Under Pennsylvania versus Mims, law enforcement officers possess the authority to order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop as a matter of officer safety. The foundational legality of the initial stop itself, however, remained completely unarticulated. "Step out of the vehicle," Grady commanded. "Is that a lawful order, officer?" Cole asked. The question is a standard legal mechanism used to establish on the record that a civilian is not exiting a vehicle voluntarily, but under the strict compulsion of police authority. "It's an order! Get out of the car right now!" Grady shouted. Cole did not argue. He did not hesitate. He slowly removed his left hand from the steering wheel, keeping it raised near the window frame. He moved his right hand deliberately toward the interior door latch. As Cole's fingers made contact with the plastic handle, Grady's reaction was instantaneous. He leaned his head down, bringing his mouth inches away from his shoulder-mounted microphone. He raised his voice to a sharp, aggressive shout that completely overwhelmed the ambient noise of the street. "Stop reaching! Keep your hands where I can see them! Stop reaching!" Grady yelled the commands repeatedly, despite the visual reality unfolding in front of him. Cole was moving at a slow, controlled pace, executing the exact physical action required to open the door and comply with the order to exit. When Cole pulled the interior latch, the heavy metal door swung open with a slow, mechanical creak. The interior dome light illuminated the grease stains on his Carhartt jacket and the heavy wear on his work boots. He did not stand up quickly. He pivoted his legs out of the cabin, placing both feet flat on the asphalt, keeping his hands clearly visible above his waistline. He was executing a surrender protocol perfectly, but the Axon camera on Grady's chest was capturing two conflicting realities simultaneously. The wide-angle lens recorded a driver moving slowly and deliberately to comply. The audio track, however, recorded an officer shouting urgent, panicked commands. The audio record now documented a hostile, non-compliant suspect who required immediate physical intervention. The moment Lieutenant Cole placed his left foot onto the asphalt and shifted his weight to stand, Officer Grady escalated the encounter from a verbal detention to a kinetic physical event. There was no pause to assess compliance. There was no distance maintained to evaluate a potential threat. As Cole's shoulders cleared the doorframe, Grady closed the remaining gap instantly, stepping deep into Cole's personal space. "I said, keep your hands visible," Grady shouted, his voice vibrating with manufactured adrenaline. He reached out, his heavy tactical gloves gripping Cole roughly by the left shoulder and wrist. Grady executed a standard physical control hold, pulling Cole's arm downward and twisting it behind his back. Cole did not tense his muscles. He did not pull away. He allowed his arm to be manipulated without a fraction of physical resistance, adhering strictly to the training protocols designed to de-escalate physical force. Despite the total lack of resistance, Grady maintained his momentum. Using his leverage, he spun the 48-year-old man around and drove him forward. Cole's chest and the side of his face impacted the cold, sloping metal of the Honda's hood. The force of the impact rocked the older vehicle slightly on its suspension. "Put your other hand behind your back! Stop resisting!" Grady yelled. The audio captured the command, but the visual record from the body camera showed a completely static subject. Cole's right hand was already moving slowly behind his back to meet his left. Grady unclipped a pair of steel Smith & Wesson handcuffs from his duty belt. He snapped the first cuff onto Cole's left wrist, ratcheting the metal teeth down tightly against the skin. He secured the right wrist a second later. In a matter of seconds, the nature of the stop had fundamentally changed. Under the Fourth Amendment, a person is seized when a police officer, by means of physical force or show of authority, restrains their freedom of movement. By applying handcuffs and pinning a subject to the hood of a vehicle, an officer transitions a standard investigatory traffic stop into a full custodial arrest. To justify this level of physical control under standard departmental use of force continuums, an officer must be able to articulate active resistance or an immediate physical threat. Officer Grady possessed neither. The application of handcuffs on a compliant, non-threatening individual constituted an unlawful detention and a direct violation of the department's use of force policy. Cole lay pinned against the hood, the red and blue strobe lights from the cruiser washing over his face in rhythmic, disorienting flashes. He did not struggle against the tight steel binding his wrists. He did not raise his voice. His breathing remained remarkably even. "Officer," Cole said, his voice completely steady, carrying clearly over the sound of the idling cruiser and the static of Grady's radio. You're going to want to read that ID on the dashboard very carefully. Grady scoffed, his breathing heavy and audible through the shoulder microphone. He had heard variations of this warning 100 times from suspects trying to bluff their way out of an arrest. It was the standard bravado of the street, and Grady was immune to it. Yeah? Why's that? Grady sneered, patting down Cole's pockets with rough, dismissive strikes. You got a lucky charm in there? Stay put. Grady stepped away from the hood, leaving Cole handcuffed and facing the windshield. He walked around the open driver's side door and leaned into the cabin of the Honda. The interior dome light cast a yellow glow over the worn upholstery and the grease-stained floor mats. Sitting in the exact dead center of the dashboard, exactly where Cole had stated it would be, was a black leather trifold wallet. Grady reached in and grabbed it. He did not suspect he was about to uncover a procedural error. He was looking for a suspended license, an outstanding warrant, or a fake ID to retroactively justify the physical force he had just deployed. He pulled the wallet out of the car, stepping back into the harsh glare of the cruiser's headlights. Holding the leather in his left hand, he used his right thumb to flip it open. The Axon body camera mounted to his chest captured the image in the high-definition video. Pinned to the inner leather flap was not a standard driver's license. It was a solid gold, intricately stamped police shield. The eagle at the top caught the red and blue strobes, flashing brilliantly in the dark. Stamped across the center of the shield, in deep black enamel lettering, was the word Lieutenant. The psychological collapse of Officer Sean Grady was not marked by a shout or a sudden movement. It was marked by absolute suffocating silence. The heavy adrenaline-fueled breathing that had dominated the body camera's audio track stopped instantly. Grady's hand froze mid-air. For 5 agonizing seconds, the only sounds recorded in the industrial parking lot were the distant hollow roar of the interstate highway and the rhythmic hiss of the police dispatch radio. Grady stared at the gold shield. He recognized the design. It was the badge of a commanding officer from the neighboring precinct. The man he had just dragged from a car, thrown onto a hood, and locked in steel handcuffs without probable cause was not a vulnerable civilian. He was a high-ranking veteran of the department. Grady's thumb slowly lowered the leather flap. He looked from the wallet to the man pinned against the car. Before Grady could stammer an apology, before his brain could formulate a defense to minimize the catastrophic error, the dynamic of authority in the parking lot inverted completely. Cole did not turn his head. He remained facing the windshield, but his civilian demeanor evaporated. When he spoke, his voice possessed the cold, absolute command of a senior administrator who had just witnessed a critical failure in his ranks. "You will call your shift supervisor," Cole ordered. The words were flat, sharp, and carried no room for negotiation. "Now, all body-worn footage and dispatch audio are to be preserved immediately." The radio at Officer Grady's shoulder remained silent for a long moment. His thumb hovered over the transmit button. To press it and request a shift supervisor to a scene where a high-ranking officer was handcuffed to the hood of a car was career suicide. But to ignore a direct order from a lieutenant, even one from a neighboring precinct, was insubordination that guaranteed immediate termination. Grady pressed the button. His voice, previously booming and aggressive, was now thin and hollow over the airwaves. "Dispatch, Unit 4 Bravo. Requesting the shift supervisor to my location." 9 minutes later, a Ford Explorer Interceptor pulled into the gas station parking lot. The vehicle did not have its sirens on, only the silent, rotating glow of its light bar reflecting off the wet asphalt. Sergeant Miller, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for strictly adhering to the patrol guide, stepped out into the damp night air. Miller walked toward the rear of the Honda. He took in the scene, the drawn flashlight resting on the trunk, the open wallet, and the man in the grease-stained jacket handcuffed against the hood. Miller's eyes moved from the gold shield in the wallet to the face of the man in steel. He recognized Lieutenant Cole immediately. They had attended the same Joint Task Force briefings for years. A long, heavy pause settled over the parking lot. The ambient noise of the distant highway seemed to amplify in the silence. Miller did not shout. He did not ask what happened. He simply turned his head, fixed his gaze on Officer Grady, and asked a single, devastating question. "Why are my lieutenant's wrists in steel?" Grady opened his mouth, but the manufactured confidence that fueled his traffic stops had completely evaporated. "Sarge, the vehicle was suspicious." He made a furtive movement toward the door panel. Sergeant Miller did not accept the street-level jargon. He immediately shifted the encounter into an on-scene audit. He pulled his own radio. "Dispatch, send me the CAD call notes and the dispatch log for 4 Bravo's current stop." He turned back to Grady. "What specific crime, Grady? Articulate the probable cause for the detention, right now." Grady swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Miller and the camera on Miller's chest. "Failure to maintain lane, and officer safety." He refused to hand over his ID. "The ID is sitting right there," Miller said, pointing to the wallet. "You initiated a custodial arrest for a lane violation?" Before Grady could attempt to dig himself out of the procedural grave, Lieutenant Cole spoke. He pushed himself slightly off the cold metal of the hood, turning his head just enough to look at Miller. He did not demand his immediate release or threaten Grady's job. Instead, Cole executed a surgical, strategic strike against Grady's ability to defend himself later. "Sergeant," Cole said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, "his report needs to be written before he reviews his footage and pull his stop data. This is no longer about one stop. It was a lethal procedural trap. By department policy, officers are often allowed to review their body camera footage before writing their final incident reports, a practice that allows them to perfectly tailor their written narratives to match the video. By explicitly demanding that Grady's probable cause narrative be locked in before he saw the footage, Cole ensured that every fabricated detail Grady wrote would be contradicted by the unblinking lens of the Axon camera. Miller understood the implication immediately. He unclipped his keys, walked over to Cole, and unlocked the handcuffs. He then turned to Grady. "Give me your duty weapon and your Axon camera. Go sit in the back of my cruiser." The friction of accountability did not end in the parking lot. It immediately escalated up the chain of command. Within an hour, the shift commander was briefed. By 2 a.m., the precinct captain was woken up by a phone call. Institutions are designed to protect themselves, and the initial reaction at the command level was an exercise in risk minimization. Over a secure conference call, the captain attempted to frame the incident internally as a miscommunication during a high-risk stop. The primary objective was to find a sliver of legal justification, an arguable reasonable suspicion that could shield Officer Grady, and by extension, the city, under the doctrine of qualified immunity. At 3:15 a.m., the city attorney was pulled from his bed and logged into the department's secure server to review the raw, unedited upload from Grady's confiscated body camera. He watched the wide-angle footage. He listened to the clear, procedural compliance from Cole. He heard Grady's fabricated shouts of, "Stop reaching," directly contradicting the visual reality of a man moving slowly and deliberately. The city attorney closed his laptop in the dark of his home office. The institutional firewall had collapsed. He picked up his phone, dialed the captain, and delivered the cold, legal reality that would end Sean Grady's career. "There is no defensible probable cause here," the attorney stated. "Strip his police powers immediately." The consequences of Officer Grady's actions did not manifest as a sudden, dramatic courtroom victory. True accountability within law enforcement is rarely cinematic. It is a slow, grinding bureaucratic process. The dismantling of Grady's career and the exposure of the department that enabled him played out across a strict, documented timeline. On the night of the incident, the institutional friction began immediately. By the time Grady was transported back to the precinct, a representative from the police union had already arrived. The union's initial posture was defensive, arguing that Grady acted within the bounds of a high-stress, low-light traffic stop. However, the city attorney's stark assessment of the body camera footage had already closed all administrative loopholes. Before the sun came up, the chief of police signed the order. Grady was stripped of his badge, his service weapon, and his police powers. He was placed on immediate suspension, pending a full internal affairs investigation. 3 weeks later, the incident threatened to break into public view. A local investigative reporter, tipped off about a high-ranking officer being unlawfully detained, filed a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request for the body-worn camera footage. The department immediately executed standard delay tactics. The city's legal division formally denied the initial request, citing an ongoing administrative investigation. Simultaneously, the police union filed a legal injunction in an attempt to block the release of the video indefinitely, arguing it would prejudice Grady's right to due process. The resistance held for a few days, but the pressure from the city attorney's office, aware of the massive civil liability sitting on their servers, forced the department's hand. Internal Affairs published their preliminary findings: sustained complaints for unlawful seizure and excessive use of force. The video was released to the public the next morning. 4 months later, the true scope of the failure was exposed. Lieutenant Cole did not simply accept an administrative apology. Acting as a private citizen, he filed a federal civil lawsuit against Officer Grady and the city, alleging a severe civil rights violation under color of law, specifically an unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment. The lawsuit forced the department into the discovery phase. Cole's legal team subpoenaed Grady's historical traffic stop, data, dispatch logs, and use of force reports for the previous 3 years. The data audit revealed exactly what Cole had suspected on the night of the arrest. There was a clear, statistically undeniable pattern of disproportionate stops and disproportionate use of force targeting minority drivers in specific zip codes. Furthermore, the audit exposed the systemic rot at the supervisory level. The early intervention system had logged the anomalies, but Grady's supervisors had manually overridden the flags, classifying his prior aggressive stops as within policy to avoid the paperwork of remedial training. 9 months later, the city reached its breaking point. Facing a public relations disaster, undeniable video evidence, and the looming threat of a federal trial they could not win, the city entered settlement negotiations. But the settlement was not just a financial payout. As part of a negotiated federal settlement, under threat of a sweeping Department of Justice review, the city was forced to sign a consent decree. Because the internal oversight mechanisms had completely failed, the department agreed to submit to an independent compliance monitor for 24 months. Every use of force report and every citizen complaint regarding traffic stops would now be audited by an outside federal observer. The supervisors who had ignored Grady's prior complaints were not spared. They received formal supervisory discipline, including demotions and permanent letters of reprimand in their files for failing to manage a subordinate officer. 12 months after the incident, the final bureaucratic hammer fell. The State Peace Officer Standards and Training Post Board convened a decertification hearing for Sean Grady. Grady did not attend the hearing. Based on the IA findings, the federal lawsuit, and the irrefutable body camera footage, the board's decision was unanimous. Grady's law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index, and he was officially placed on the Brady list, rendering him legally useless as a witness in any future criminal proceeding. He was permanently barred from holding a badge in any jurisdiction in the country. The system had finally worked, but only after it had accidentally targeted one of its own architects. When a department's oversight mechanisms only function correctly after a high-ranking officer is unlawfully placed in steel handcuffs, is the system actually serving the public or just protecting itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what city or country you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into real accountability.
This concludes today's report. To access more official footage, please like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.